Hello, it's Aresevé. Welcome to Major Dreams, Minor Thoughts, an audio diary that documents and covers topics related to music history, the history of music industry, and the historical context and politics around the genres and music consumed by the masses. This entry focuses on the history of city pop, how it became a Japanese symbol of prosperity and confidence, and how this association eventually led to its downfall. I wanted to research why and how city pop could fall out of popularity despite the whimsical and beautiful sound the genre elicits. This entry will cover the origins of Japanese city pop and J-pop and the surprising political and economic implications Japan had on the genre's demise. Part 1. The Land of Rising City Pop. City pop began its meteoric rise in the late 1960s in the prefecture Tokyo, Japan. The genre of city pop has been cited as not having a definitive sound or musical definition, but drawing inspiration from many sources. City pop owes its name to the feeling associated with innovation, big emotions, and sound quality, which drew comparisons to major cities. City pop gained its trademark sound from the largely black Western musical influences. Happy End is the band widely considered being the foundation of Japanese city pop. They were influential for singing the largely Western-inspired genre completely in Japanese. It had been a common practice to sing Western-styled songs in English rather than Japanese. Their singing and lyrics centered urban life, which was a departure from the Japanese rock music, set them apart in the Japanese musical space. Sugar Babe, a Japanese band, also followed a similar career path. They were also inspired by and combined Western musical styles, including jazz, R&B, soul, and funk with their own unique approach to composition. Many of the biggest city pop artists, such as Ichi Otaki, a member of the rock band Happy End, Yamashita Tatsuro, a Japanese singer and songwriter most known for the song Christmas Eve, Onuki Taiko, a Japanese singer, songwriter, and musician most known for her hit album Mignon and her single 4am, and Takeuchi Mariah, most notable for her viral song Plastic Love, have gone on record to state they were influenced by contemporary rock, pop, and black music styles from the US, including jazz, R&B, disco, funk, and soul. Many artists took inspiration from these various genres and created something uniquely different and synonymous with Japanese music, a genre that would go on to encapsulate the prosperity and success of an entire history in modern Japan. Surprisingly, a large portion of city pop's success wasn't found until 40 years after its creation, with it only going viral and making stars originally famous in Japan globally superstars. In Japan, city pop had a tumultuous start, with city pop not being considered a major genre in the Japanese music industry. City pop was initially disregarded by the Japanese public at large due to its Western influences. City pop gained prominence due to its unique production quality, which caused it to become popular amongst younger Japanese people in the early 1970s. In 1970, Japan was 25 years removed from its associated war crimes in World War II. The country succeeded in its more than 3-decade-long rebranding campaign. This rebranding campaign aimed to market Japan to the world. Following the bombing of Hiroshima and the fall of Nazi Germany, who Japan sided with in the previous World War. Following these tragedies, Japan became a global economic superpower. Many wars and smaller conflicts positioned Japan to experience an industry boom. With this economic rise came a massive transfer of wealth to large groups of Japanese people who'd been historically impoverished for centuries. The economic boom, coupled with the technological advancements, resulted in a prosperous time for nearly all of Japan. City pop's rise was heavily tied to the prosperity era that occurred in Japan during the period. The sound of city pop was in direct correspondence to the carefree culture, coupled with optimistic young Japanese people were experiencing in relation to Japanese society. This association with prosperity is what helped city pop soar to popularity in Japan, but also aided in its demise. If you were to ask an older Japanese person who was old enough to remember this time of prosperity, you would most likely be met with confusion. City pop is a new title that only got its name in recent years, largely in the West. These were marketing terms used to describe a pop music genre that emerged in the mid-1970s and peaked in the 1980s. City pop for the Japanese was intrinsically linked to the free-spirited, breezy attitudes of the young, upwardly mobile, middle-class Japanese people. In the 1950s, Japan experienced one of its most significant economic boosts, primarily due to the Korean War and the increase in labor supply. Following Japan's defeat in World War II, the Korean peninsula, previously under the inhumane and harsh rule of Japan, was divided. The primary cause of the Korean War was North Korea's invasion of South Korea on June 25, 1950, with the goal of reunifying the peninsula under communist rule. The Soviet Union-backed Communist North and the US-backed South created the beginning of a Cold War that escalated into a civil war and then a proxy war between the two superpowers. The Korean War led to the increased need for supplies and support, which created a massive economic boost for Japan through special procurement. This need led to an influx in U.S. currency, which resulted in an influx of dollars and a surge in Japanese production. Japanese companies such as Mitsubishi and Kawasaki became crucial in repairing and refurbishing U.S. military equipment, like tanks, aircraft, and producing essential goods. The war also caused a significant number of Koreans to flee to Japan, forming the largest post-World War II Korean population. This boost led to an increase in labor and an increased income, with the exact numbers being unsubstantiated. For the first time in history, Japanese consumers could afford luxuries such as radios, sewing machines, cars, TVs, and even air conditioning. Japan's economy was growing at an estimated rate of 10% per year, making Japan a global superpower by the 1970s, placing it as the third strongest economy after the US and Soviet Union. Japan at one point became the world's largest producer of ships, radios, television, and cars, as well as the global producer of steel. With this prosperity came the introduction of the well-known archetype, the salaryman. The salaryman represents a Japanese, white-collar, corporate worker. As indicated by the name, they were typically male, characterized by unwavering loyalty to his company. This attitude culminated into long work hours, a uniform or dark suit, and prioritizing his career and company over family life. This archetype became the bedrock of post-war Japan's economic boom and later anime, embodying a commitment to work as a national ideal. The idea of spending a lifetime at a single large company granted newly graduated males a lifetime of job security. This job security translated to a quarter of the country gaining lifetime employment, making Japanese people on average the wealthiest people in the world. With this archetype also included the extreme overwork, poor work-life balance, high stress, and almost zero emphasis on individuality. This model helped position Japan as the number 2 economy in the world, but also had an extreme unforeseen adverse effect on the mental and physical health of Japanese society. Karoshi, translated to death by overwork, became so common it had its own term created. The extreme stress and physical fatigue of this lifestyle led to the cardiovascular events like heart attacks, strokes, and mental health issues such as depression and increased suicide. This led to the infamous trend of alcoholism. This tradition was put in place by employers to strengthen workplace bonds. This was an obligatory event which contributed to alcohol dependence to cope with the overall unhealthy lifestyle, which led to the equally as popular drunk salaryman archetype, which characterized overworked, burnt-out salarymen as drunk, lewd older men. This corporate structure blended into Japanese society, becoming nearly indistinguishable, leading to the loss of community and a rise in mental health issues. Part 2. The Day the Neon Lights Went Out. Japanese society's growing prosperity, coupled with their toxic work culture, culminated in Japan having the largest global economic overreach. This overreach even extended into having holdings in 4% of American businesses and finances. This economic triumph would later be the beginning of the end for the Japanese prosperity era. The U.S., becoming wary of Japan's economic power and their rising global influence, allegedly devised a plan to stall Japan's economy. to ensure it didn't become the next global superpower. The U.S. trade pressures are often cited as contributing significantly to Japan's economic stagnation, leading to the lost decade. The literature cites three major events as being the contributing factors for Japan's eventual economic fall, beginning with the 1985 Plaza Accord. Signed in 1985 by the G5 nations, the US, Japan, West Germany, France, and the UK, the 1985 Plaza Accord aimed to depreciate the US dollar. This was in efforts to reduce the large U.S. trade deficit and to de-escalate protectionist pressures by making American goods more competitive globally. The 1985 Plaza Accord did have its intended effect, but it also caused the value of the Japanese yen to appreciate dramatically, which effectively doubled the value of the Japanese yen against the dollar by 1989. The strong Japanese yen made Japanese exports such as cars, electronics, and microchips significantly more expensive and thus less competitive on a global market. While the 1985 Accord bolstered the Japanese yen and made it stronger, this decrease in competition proved fatal for a country that had seen record-breaking economic growth for nearly 3 decades. For Japan, that had based their entire economic growth model around their continued economic success, this decrease in competition shocked the Japanese export-driven economy. To counteract the effects of the strong yen and stimulate competitive demand, the Bank of Japan cut interest rates, which according to the National Monetary Fund was the beginning of the end. The second crucial event that signaled Japan's inevitable fall was the semiconductor trade agreements. This trade agreement refers to the 1986 U.S.-Japanese Semiconductor Agreement. The 1986 U.S.-Japanese Semiconductor Agreement mandated that Japan, quote, end dumping of semiconductors through fair market value (FMV) pricing and open its domestic market to foreign firms. For reference, semiconductors are a material with electrical conductivity between that of conductor, like metal, and an insulator, like rubber. Nearly all electronic devices and systems utilize semiconductors, ranging from computers to cars. The dumping referenced in the agreement refers to the flooding of the global market with semiconductors below their cost of production. Japan had a surplus of semiconductors, hence they were able to essentially wholesale them for less than it took to produce them. The U.S. alleged Japan created a global semiconductor monopoly. The U.S. alleged this system, coupled with Japan's export-based economy, was an unfair form of market cornering. This agreement aimed to secure a 20% foreign market share on semiconductors in Japan by 1992. The U.S. argued Japan's business and economic practices were predatory and didn't allow for an open and fair market, with many Japanese economists arguing these agreements were a protectionist tool to undermine Japan's competitive advantage. Japan agreed to the trade deal, which required them to limit their semiconductor chip exports to the U.S. The deal also entailed the suspended dumping of semiconductors in the global market. The U.S. would later go on to accuse Japan of violating the semiconductor agreement. The U.S. alleged that Japan had continued dumping microchips on the international market at prices below production costs. As a retaliatory act in 1987, the Reagan administration and the U.S. imposed 100% tariffs on $300 million worth of Japanese electronics. This retaliatory act dealt a significant blow to Japan's tech industry, which at this point had become an international superpower. These pressures cost an estimated $5.9 billion worth of taxation on Japanese goods. Because of Japan's perceived threat as a global and economic superpower, many Western countries, the U.S. in particular, mounted constant pressure for Japan to open its market to American goods. By the 1990s, the Clinton administration engaged in aggressive negotiations to address Japan's trade surplus, with the U.S. particularly concerning automobiles. The U.S. trade policy for the better part of 20 years leading up to the 1990s had been largely aggressive, aimed at pushing back against Japan's perceived unethical economic practices and closed market that made Japan a leading force in the global economy. The economic Cold War relating to the American policy and markets only exacerbated an already growing problem relating to Japan's economy. In 1995, after 20 years of aggressive economic practices, Japan was forced to negotiate. The US and Japan eventually reached a deal in June 1995. The agreements ensured the US's aggressive tariffs would end, and Japan reluctantly agreed to open its markets. Many Japanese economists believe Japan's age of prosperity imparted a false sense of global economic security. Because of the compounding factors ranging from aggressive tariffs to trade pressures coupled with prolonged economic growth, the Japanese government made many poor financial decisions under the guise that the rising sun of prosperity would never set. This economic mindset resulted in the Japanese government and central bank allowing trillions of dollars of debt to accumulate. Economists cite that Japan accrued a massive amount of public debt due to the decades of persistent stimulus spending, low inflation, and a rapidly aging population. Japan had also dispersed loans over the course of decades, with most of the collateral relying on the foundations of Japan's real estate sector. Because of this, in 1989, the Bank of Japan raised interest rates to curb the asset inflation that had been building for a decade prior. By August of 1990, the Bank of Japan had implemented a fifth rate hike, but by 1990, the stock market had already reached a peak before crashing. The culmination of these various pressures, both foreign and domestic, create what would later be referred to as the Lost Decade. Part 3. The Void Century. Because of the nearly 3-decade-long economic miracle that transformed Japan into the world's second-largest economy, Japanese countries developed an economic strategy from the viewpoint that the age of prosperity would never end. Many Japanese companies exhausted their finances under the guise that they would be replenished either through government stimulus or the increased economic growth. Companies like Sony made major purchases, like acquiring Columbia Pictures in September 1989. This acquisition costed a total of $3.4 billion, making it the largest Japanese acquisition of property at the time in America. Sony bought Columbia in their acquisition of 1989 primarily to diversify its business beyond electronics like the Walkman. Sony's aim was to control both the hardware, the device, and the software, which included video games, TV programs, and music. Many Japanese companies participated in acquisitions that were both large and risky. The bubble in Japanese stock prices would burst in the 1990s, and by mid-1992, equity prices would have fallen by approximately 60%. Land prices began a similar trend a year after stock prices, with the trend continuing well into the early 2000s. The asset price collapse created a major issue for the banking system by impairing collateral loans and eroding bank capital. Firms and other companies that borrow heavily during Japan's export-heavy economic boom found themselves with massive debt and a slowing economy, which disrupted all of Japan's sectors. Japan experienced a significant rise in suicide rates following the economic collapse in the 1990s, with a noticeable rise in suicide of the Japanese salaryman between the ages of 40 and 60. Many of these men were often the sole earners of their families, going on to take their lives following their firing or bankruptcy. To mitigate the damage caused by the policies that crippled them, Japan's bank increased lending, increasing land and stock prices, which momentarily helped restore strong growth in the second half of the 1980s, but ultimately leading to the opposite intended effect. These seemingly unrelated but deeply interconnecting compounding events led to the downfall of city pop. The bursting of the real estate bubble in 1991 sparked the lost decade, Japan's crashing stock market leading to the end of the employment golden age. Many hopeful young Japanese professionals got a front row seat to the end of the golden age of the salaryman. With this came the communal loss of faith in the Japanese economic system, which cascaded into communal demoralization. City pop's strong association with prosperity, fun, and confidence, coupled with the changing music tastes, industry practices, and expectations of artists, meant the end for the beloved genre. The young Japanese working class became disenchanted with the prosperity promised by their country. With this came a loss of confidence, not only in their country and economy, but also within themselves. This loss of confidence made city pop a painful reminder of happier and more prosperous days. City pop became a painful reminder of the lives many young people felt they'd been robbed of. J-pop didn't directly kill city pop, but the decline of city pop was a result of Japan's economic crash, changing cultural trends, and the end of city pop's emphasis on consumerism. While young Japanese professionals were divorcing city pop, J-pop arrived on the scene with the idol. Idols were singing groups comprised of multifaceted, multi-talented, and highly curated individuals. J-pop adopted and commercialized city pop's formula and aesthetic with the introduction of the idol. J-pop turned city pop style into a formulaic and more synthetic sound that reportedly diluted its distinctiveness. J-pop wasn't distinct or different from its predecessor city pop, but through strategic use of CDs and television in the 1990s, the genre was able to create a massive domestic market. The global rise of anime allowed for J-pop's international expansion through Japan's newfound global coolness. With the rise of J-pop, major artists and idol groups became household names. Their presence throughout TV, radio, ads, and other forms of media beyond music resulted in non-stop campaigns that eventually won the hearts and minds of the Japanese public. The rise of the internet and streaming platforms expanded J-pop's global reach, connecting fans through anime and social media. The emergence of J-pop signaled the end of an era for city pop. Television became more widespread, and with that came artists as brands instead of just traditional singers. The beginning of a recession and the emergence of J-pop signaled the end for the confident, vibrant, and optimistic sound of city pop. Part 4. The Neon Twilight. Brief history of city pop's revival. Following city pop's fall from grace beginning in the 1990s, it experienced a surge in popularity beginning in the 2010s. City pop largely had Japanese crate diggers to thank for this revival. Japanese crate diggers refers to collectors and DJs who search for vintage and obscure records in Japan. These collectors would often seek out both domestic and imported records. They tended to focus on unique Japanese versions of Western songs with excellent sound quality. Japan is a geographically unique place to search for records because of the high number of brick and mortar record shops. There is not only a large occurrence of these stores, but also many popular chains with a vast selection of records for these collectors to find. These records have maintained such pristine condition because of the Japanese record company's strict quality control. Crate diggers, in essence, are a subgroup of DJs whose aim is to curate a specific sound and musical style by remixing other songs. Their skill is in finding often obscure and forgotten classics and remixing them to give them a second life. These practices originated from black artists in America who would sample and remix funk and R&B, which laid the groundwork for hip-hop. The resurgence of city pop and the timeline could be its own video, so I will do a general overview. The dissertation that I reference is linked in the description for anyone who wants to dive into the resurgence of city pop. The title is Memory Vague, A History of City Pop by Jeffrey Salazar. This paper was vital in summarizing a lot of the terminology and chronological history of city pop to expand on. City pop's revival happened in the mid-2010s, but city pop's largest spike in popularity wouldn't come until Miki Matsuburu's 1979 song Meyonaka no Door, Stay With Me. Stay With Me gained prominence when it went viral on TikTok, which cascaded into viral videos and over 100 million views and streams globally. Following Stay With Me's massive success, many listeners resonated with the sound and optimism of city pop and began looking for similar artists. This resulted in Plastic Love by Maria Takeuchi, originally released in 1984, going viral and following a similar trajectory. Thanks to the YouTube algorithm and many other music platforms, city pop has seen a large and consistent jump in popularity that signals it may be here to stay. Special thanks to Nako Gushima for inspiring this journal entry, and special thanks to anyone who tuned in. Until next time, have a good one. Sincerely, Aresevé.